You're listening to Trek FM.
Hello and welcome to From There to Here, Trek FM's 50th Anniversary Rewatch, in which we look at all 729 episodes of Star Trek from beginning to end. I'm Mike from Stage 9.
I'm Ken from Standard Orbit.
And today we're going to be looking at 2 episodes of Voyager, one of the infamous Voyager two-parters. I don't know if it's infamous, really. I think they're one of the beloved Voyager two-parters.
Could it be belovedly infamous?
Probably, yeah.
I don't
Voyager, right? So.
Okay.
Future's End, Parts 1 and 2. All right. So Future's End is the two-parter in which the Enterprise runs into like a time ship from the 29th.
Could be the Voyager.
Oh, yeah, Voyager, Enterprise, whatever. It's one of those ships from Star Trek. Run into another ship from the 29th century, and they're like, the timeline is all messed up or something. We need to destroy you, or else everything is going to be messed up. And Voyager's like, that does not sound like a good idea. How about we don't do that? And they get thrown back in time to 1996 in Earth. They're orbiting Earth, and this is, kind of like a good news, bad news situation. Good news in that they're finally home. Bad news in that they're, like 400 years too early. And while they're there, they meet Sarah Silverman, who works at like SETI or something like that, and then they meet Ed Begley Jr., who has had an encounter with this time ship thing and has technology from the 29th century, and basically he's Bill Gates, and he's the reason why computer technology has advanced so much over the years. And they need to figure out a way to get back to where they're supposed to be without infecting the timeline any more than it's already been infected. And they have to go into modern-day Los Angeles in order to do so. So, Ken, what did you think about this two-parter?
What did I think about it? I'll tell you, internally, I always go into time travel episodes going, this is going to be awful. It doesn't matter. I can tell you that when they told me that in Star Trek 4 they were going back in time, I was not looking forward to seeing the movie, just because it's like, I can't stand when they go back in time. And then, of course, I love Star Trek 4. In this one, I thought it was okay. I struggled with it in a couple of ways. One, Voyager uses the time travel gimmick all the time. So in this particular case, going back to Earth and seeing it again after all these years, it did remind me a lot of Star Trek 4. The fish out of water type of scenarios, the different characters that they meet. The plot was really a bait and switch. What you thought was the bad ship was the good ship, which there was really a bad ship that had crashed before, and you're trying to figure out who was good and who was evil. The ending of this thing was very fascinating. We have this discussion all the time regarding, I think, all the series. Why is it always one or two people that do the crazy things? And in this case, it was Janeway manually setting and launching a torpedo and gets burned by it, not a weapons technician or somebody who would normally do something like that. So yeah. I don't know. There was just a lot of things about this episode that, it was in certain aspects fun. There was some humor in it, but for me it was just like you see them on Earth, they can't stay there because the series wouldn't make sense, and there's a part of me, it's like it was a tease. That's how I would frame it for me. How about yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up Star Trek 4 because it really feels like Star Trek 4, like on a lot of levels. The fact that they're going back in time to modern day Earth, the fact that they have, the scientist from the present day, who is kind of an outsider in her time period, but she discovers what's going on with these space guys, and she fits in more with them than she does with her own people. And she kind of starts up a semi-romantic relationship with one of them, in this case Tom Paris, and all that stuff. And I think that it's okay. Even a lot of the jokes, I think, were similar. I mean, you even had the Vulcan wearing the thing to hide his ears and all that stuff, But I don't know. I mean, some of that was okay. One of the things which I found to be fascinating about that is from the very beginning they were like, oh, this is Los Angeles. And they say it as if like they've never heard, like this is completely foreign to them. Like he's down in this city, Los Angeles. Like there's a Los Angeles in the 24th century, guys. I'm sure you've heard of it, because it's probably a really big city, unless it really did, break away from the mainland and just fall into the ocean like everyone thinks it will eventually. But no,
wouldn't
there's
that
a
make
lot.
it more famous? Yeah, so
you would think, right?
Right.
But I mean, so that was kind of weird. But I did kind of really love when they were like their version of double dumbass on you, essentially. When they go down to Los Angeles and you see just like the landscape of people, right? And it feels like almost like the costume designers and the production designers and everyone who was making this show in Los Angeles in 1996 like had no idea what it was really like, and they were almost like making sort of like it presents 1996 as if it is like a period piece, where like everyone's got their rollerblades and their crazy things, and they do this panning thing over like the craziest people you've ever seen in your life, and then it gets up to like Tuvok or whoever, and they're like, we could have just worn our Starfleet uniforms and no one would have noticed, and I think that's kind of like a great line, and it really does speak to that, and you know what it reminds me a lot of, and this is going to sound crazy, but that's okay. It reminds me of the movie Clueless. Have you ever seen Clueless?
I've seen Clueless. Yeah, it's been a while, but yeah.
I actually saw Clueless on the big screen last night. It was amazing, and it's one of my favorite movies. But one of the things that I always loved about Clueless is that it really does sort of present like modern day high school as if it were like someone from the future doing sort of like a super stylized like caricature version of the 90s, and that's kind of how I felt that they treated the 90s and the fashions and everything here in Voyager, and I kind of like that because it's sort of like a commentary on how crazy things were back then in terms of fashion and stuff. I don't know,
that is quite a jump to go from Future's End to Clueless. As you were talking, and I was thinking about the plot of Clueless and these teenage girls that have absolutely no sense of reality, and the costumes and everything that you were saying, and then kind of trying to pull it back into this movie. I guess it was kind of an amped up view of a very specific area in time. Clueless was Hollywood or something, right? Or Beverly Hills or something.
Yeah, it was like Beverly Hills in the Valley. Yeah,
that type of thing. And in this episode, it's just kind of over, the whole city just is, it's kind of wild rock and roll and, that type of stuff. I mean, if they were on Venice Beach, that might have worked really, really well. But, I see that. And to a degree, they did that in Star Trek 4 too, but not quite as overtly. Right.
Yeah. There was like the scene on the bus, but that was the big one, I think. Most of the time they were rather subdued. But okay, so let me ask you that. I've got two unrelated questions for you here in regards to this episode and all that stuff. First off, okay, there's the whole thing where they at the end, they're like, okay, Mr. Time Ship Dude, could you like we want to go back to the 24th century, but could you just like not move us, like keep us here? And he's like, no, I can't, because of temporal prime directive. So I have to send you back exactly where you were. And they're like, fine, okay, that's cool. And they do that. But one of the things which either they don't tell him or maybe he doesn't care about is the fact that, this is the episode where the Doctor gets his mobile emitter. And it's, 29th century technology.
Right.
And he grabs that thing and holds on to it, and at no point is he like, oh, I better give this back to you too. He's like, screw that, I'm keeping this thing. I think that's kind of interesting that, obviously they need to get them back to the Delta Quadrant, otherwise you don't have a show anymore. And yet they were rather selective with their adherence to the temporal prime directive when it came to the Doctor keeping his mobile emitter. I don't know. That's weird. But what do you think about the Doctor having a mobile emitter?
Well, obviously it freed up the character quite a bit, and it made for some very entertaining episodes. But as far as what you're saying about violating the... One thing I will say about Voyager that was very consistent was Janeway was a by-the-book captain. She didn't deviate at all from the Prime Directive. Probably more so than any other captain. There was probably less opportunity for Sisko to get into situations where you have to make a decision to violate or not violate the Prime Directive. But for all the other episodes, they were consistent. And I thought that kind of stood out quite a bit. That in this case, because it was an advantage for him, and they were so complacent in going back, by the way, which is kind of strange, it doesn't fit the Voyager or the Captain Janeway approach to things, because of all the irreparable harm that can happen from something like that. So I thought it showed that sometimes in order to make a story fit into a nice package, you kind of break your own rules a little bit to make that happen. And that's sort of how I saw it. But it wasn't a huge deal because of, like I said, it allowed for that. I'm sure Robert Picardo was thrilled to be able to get off the ship and do things.
Yeah, and I can understand that. I can understand, all that stuff. But at the same time, I feel like every Star Trek show does this at some point in time, where they're like, we have this character, and he's just like you and me, except, like Data, except he doesn't have emotions, or Geordi, except he has, this visor. And after a while, because basically they get tired of the gimmick and the character has sort of become his own thing, they take that unique element away from them. Data gets his emotion chip, Geordi gets his ocular implants. And here the Doctor, one of the unique things about him was that he could not leave sickbay. He was stuck there. And here, they could have just as easily said, like, we have holographic emitters placed throughout this ship, but that was specifically designed, from the beginning for him to not, be able to leave sickbay. And, here, now he can. And I don't know, that kind of bothers me in a sense because it takes away one of those things that makes him unique.
Isn't that funny? Yeah, I didn't look at it all through that lens, and I didn't even think about that piece of it, that it was taking away the uniqueness. I guess when you do something for X amount of years, like you say, you've got to change something. You don't have to, I guess, and that probably would have been... I don't know, Mike. I don't know how many people besides you would have noticed that, and in that sense, or if they said if he stayed in sickbay for the entire 7 years, would that have been part of his lexicon? And there've been a lot of talks and panels about that. And would Robert Picardo be on stage going, yeah, like Billingsley all the time? He hardly had to work because he was always down in sickbay, right? So he could have had those same stories. So that's an excellent observation, and one that makes, I'm sure, make a lot of listeners think about that. Yeah.
I guess with the Doctor is one of those things where, since he was, especially at that time, I think one of the best written characters that they had on Voyager, that he had kind of reached a point where he didn't need that restriction anymore, and they could free him up without losing the character that they had, because he was so unique in so many other ways. But I don't know, I just find it interesting that this seems to be a thing on Star Trek where it's almost like they get like a season into it and they're like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have done that. Well, whatever.
Hey, great call out.
The other thing, which I want to ask you about is, word on the street is that for a while there, when they were trying to mix things up on Voyager, they were considering keeping Sarah Silverman's character on the show as a series regular. How do you think that would have worked?
I think that she would have added some, I guess, some flair to the show a little bit. And I mean, that, kind of that middle ground of comic relief. I mean, she would have been the fish out of water the other way around. She was already a fish out of water in her own time zone. We get that established. So I think it would have been an interesting idea to do that. There are times in Star Trek where people are, and I remember more on The Next Generation, where people are allowed to stay and brought on, and then you never see them again. Mm-hmm. they're escaping this or fleeing that. So I think that obviously they went in a very different direction with Jerry Ryan, but I think that show, it kind of struggled unless they were doing their holograph episodes. To have that levity. It was a very serious show too often, and it took itself too seriously. So she could have added an element that could have, I guess, brought it down the middle. I mean, with her and Jerry Ryan coming on that show, more women, you would have had really the extremes too. So, it would have been a very interesting woulda, coulda, shoulda, for me. And I guess I would love to have seen them try to experiment with it.
Yeah, I think it would have been cool too. And I mean, this was back when nobody knew who Sarah Silverman was. She was,
right.
And you can tell, like, watching this episode, that she's just kind of starting to, hone her craft or whatever. There's a few things where she just seems a little too over the top and stuff like that. And I mean, you look at the stuff that she's doing now, and she's spot on. I think that she's pretty great. But I don't know. I mean, when I heard about that, I was like, I wish they would have done that. Even if it didn't work, I'd just like to see what that would have been like. It would have been really interesting.
I think so. Yeah, yeah. I think if there's any episode that, Deep Space Nine season 4 was trying to find its way and get its audience bigger. Same thing with Voyager, and that would have been a neat approach. You're right though. She didn't have the name recognition then.
No.
Like she has now, and she really took off a few years later. And it is funny looking at her. I mean, you can tell she's a kid, but she's one of those people that ages very, very well.
Oh yeah, for sure. All right, so I guess that pretty much wraps up Future's End. Ken, where can people find you on the internet?
They can find me as a co-host of Standard Orbit, or you can find me on the Babel Conference, Trek FM's Facebook page, or you can find me on Twitter at Boston SCPO. That's Boston Senior Chief Petty Officer. And you, Mike?
You can find me right here on Trek FM doing Stage 9 with John Mills, where we talk about the people who make Star Trek. And you can also find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K. All right, well, that's it for today, but we will be back tomorrow with 2 more episodes of Deep Space Nine. Let he who is without sin and things past.